January 16th, 2026. South China Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln conducts routine flight operations 300 miles east of the Philippines. Carrier Air Wing 9 launches training sorties. F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters practicing strike profiles. Super Hornets running electronic warfare scenarios with EA-18G Growlers. Standard peacetime operations in contested waters. Then the secure communication link from U.S. Indo-Pacific Command activates on the bridge. Priority flash traffic. New orders, new mission, new theater. The Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is directed to immediately cease current operations and sprint to the Persian Gulf. Not next month, not next week, now. Here's what makes that order extraordinary. The Lincoln is 8,000 nautical miles from the Strait of Hormuz. That's the distance from New York to Mumbai. The Pentagon is ordering a complete theater transition in 3 weeks. Maximum sustainable speed, minimal port calls. This is the fastest carrier redeployment since Operation Desert Storm in 1990. The question isn't whether the Lincoln can make the transit. Nuclear-powered carriers can maintain 30 knots indefinitely without refueling. The question is why the Pentagon chose this specific carrier for a crisis sprint when 3 other carriers sit closer to the Middle East. Why Lincoln? What crisis in Iran requires the ship that spent 4 years and $3 billion being rebuilt specifically for 5th-generation warfare? What makes this 35-year-old Nimitz-class carrier worth abandoning the Indo-Pacific when China poses the most significant long-term threat to American naval power? The answer comes down to 3 factors: Iran's internal collapse, the F-35C Lightning II, and a ship that proved it can sustain operations longer than any adversary can maintain pressure. This is the story of the sprint. If you want to understand why carrier selection matters in crisis response, type capability in the comments. Welcome to Navy Decoded. This is why they rushed Lincoln 8,000 miles in 3 weeks. The Iranian crisis timeline. To understand the sprint order, you need to see what was happening in Iran while the Lincoln operated in the South China Sea. January 2026 marks the most severe internal threat to the Islamic Republic since the 1979 revolution. January 8th. Protests erupt in Tehran, triggered by economic collapse and the death of a young woman in police custody. Within 48 hours, demonstrations spread to 15 major cities: Isfahan, Mashhad, Shiraz, Tabriz. Millions in the streets demanding regime change. January 11th, Iranian security forces open fire on protesters. Over 100 dead in a single day. The government imposes a near-total internet blackout. National connectivity drops to 5%, trying to prevent coordination and suppress international awareness. It doesn't work. The unrest expands. January 13th, oil workers at Abadan Refinery and Karg Island Terminal launch strikes. This facility processes 400,000 barrels per day. Workers walk off. Production halts. The regime's primary revenue source starts collapsing. Reports emerge of defections among lower-ranking military personnel. Soldiers refusing orders to fire on civilians, officers quietly disappearing from their posts. January 15th, President Trump issues a statement. The United States stands with the Iranian people fighting for freedom. Help is on the way. We are locked and loaded. Behind that public declaration, a classified assessment lands on the president's desk. Senior military officials and intelligence analysts present the strategic calculation. Iran's regime faces existential collapse. If the government falls, the power vacuum could trigger regional chaos. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas remnants, Houthi forces in Yemen, Iraqi militias, all Iranian proxies, suddenly without direction or funding. Some might escalate to prove relevance. Others might fracture into competing factions, fighting for control of weapons stockpiles. But the greater risk is what Iran does, while the regime still maintains cohesion. When governments face collapse, deterrence stops working. Leaders with nothing to lose make calculations that rational actors avoid. The assessment warns that Iran might attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz, not to win a military confrontation, but to impose maximum economic damage before losing power. Take 20% of global oil supply offline. Spike prices to $200 per barrel. Create an economic crisis that outlasts the regime itself. 21 million barrels of oil flow through that 21-mile-wide strait every day. Japan receives 90% of its crude oil through Hormuz. South Korea, 70%. India, 60%. China, 40%. If Iran closes that choke point for even 1 week, global markets seize, supply chains collapse, Economies that depend on just-in-time petroleum delivery grind to a halt. The U.S. military has only hours of warning if Iran decides to act. Mobile missile launchers reposition under darkness. Fast attack boats sortie from concealed bases. Naval mines get deployed from civilian vessels. Once the decision is made in Tehran, the window to prevent closure shrinks to minutes. January 16th, the National Security Council convenes. The assessment is clear. The United States needs overwhelming strike capability in the Persian Gulf immediately. Not defensive capability, offensive. The ability to penetrate Iranian air defenses and destroy their coastal missile batteries before they can launch. The capability to find and eliminate mobile launchers hidden in mountain complexes. The aircraft to execute suppression of enemy air defenses while strike packages neutralize Iran's A-2AD network. That requires F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters. And in January 2026, only one carrier operating in the Indo-Pacific carries a Marine F-35C squadron. The USS Abraham Lincoln with VMFA 314 embarked. 10 stealth fighters optimized for exactly this mission. The sprint order goes out. Lincoln diverts immediately. Why this ship? USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, fifth ship of the Nimitz class. Commissioned in 1989. Most carriers that old are nearing retirement. Lincoln is different. Between 2013 and 2017, this ship underwent the most comprehensive rebuild in modern naval history. Refueling and complex overhaul. RCOH, Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia. 4 years in dry dock. The Navy invested $3 billion. Technicians cut through the hull with precision tools. They removed both Westinghouse A4W nuclear reactors. These reactors had powered the ship for 23 years. Replacement cores were installed, providing 25 years of additional propulsion. The ship will operate until the 2040s, without another refueling. But RCOH is more than reactor replacement. The entire ship gets rebuilt from the inside. Every system, every wire, every pipe. Workers stripped out 1980s analog systems and installed digital networks. Copper wiring replaced with fiber optics, providing 10,000 times the data transmission capacity. Obsolete radar systems removed. New AN, SPS 48E air search radar installed with three-dimensional detection capability out to 250 miles. Upgraded AN, SPS 49 for long-range surveillance. Enhanced electronic warfare systems. Most critical for the Iran mission, Lincoln became the first Nimitz-class carrier specifically modified for F-35C operations. This wasn't a simple compatibility upgrade. This was optimization. The F-35C produces significantly more heat than legacy aircraft. Its Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine generates 43,000 pounds of thrust and extreme exhaust temperatures. The jet blast deflectors on the flight deck needed reinforcement. Engineers installed enhanced cooling systems and heat-resistant materials. The F-35C requires massive electrical power for its mission systems. AN, APG-81 AESA radar. Distributed aperture system providing 360-degree infrared coverage. Electronic warfare suite. Sensor fusion processing, all running simultaneously during flight operations. Lincoln's upgraded electrical generation and distribution systems were designed to support these power demands. Maintenance facilities were modified for working on low observable coatings. Special tools, controlled environments, training for maintainers on classified systems. When the Lincoln emerged from RCOH in 2017, this wasn't a refurbished Cold War carrier. This was a fifth-generation warfare platform in a proven hull. The operational record. But capability on paper means nothing without operational proof. Lincoln has that proof. 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic shut down ports worldwide. Carriers couldn't conduct normal deployment patterns. Ships stayed at sea to avoid outbreaks. Most carriers managed 90 to 120 days before needing to return for supplies and maintenance. USS Abraham Lincoln deployed for 295 consecutive days. Let me say that again. 295 days. No port calls, no maintenance breaks, no resupply beyond what could be delivered at sea. Just sustained operations for 10 months straight. Flight operations 4 hours a day, 7 days a week. Combat readiness maintained at 100% throughout. That's not just endurance, that's dominance. China's carriers Liaoning and Shandong managed 90 days maximum before requiring pier time. Russia's Admiral Kuznetsov hasn't left port in 3 years and caught fire at the dock. Britain's HMS Queen Elizabeth conducts 6-month deployments as standard. Lincoln did 10 months and the crew didn't just survive, they maintained full operational tempo. This record matters for the Iran sprint. When you need a carrier that can arrive in theater and immediately begin high-intensity operations without a workup period, you send the ship that proved it can sustain pressure longer than any adversary can maintain resistance. But 295 days at sea is ancient history. What matters in January 2026 is recent combat experience. 18 months ago, the Lincoln operated in the Red Sea during the Houthi crisis. Iranian-backed Houthi forces in Yemen launched anti-ship ballistic missiles at commercial vessels and U.S. Navy destroyers. Real missiles, real targets, real consequences. The Lincoln Carrier Strike Group shot them down, multiple intercepts under actual combat conditions. Aegis destroyers USS Spruance, USS Stockdale, and USS O'Kane engaged ballistic missiles with SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors. The crew watched incoming missiles on radar scopes. They executed engagement procedures. They destroyed threats before impact. So when the sprint order arrives on January 16th, this isn't theoretical. This is the crew that already knows what combat looks like. They know what Iranian missile profiles look like on radar. They've executed the procedures under pressure. This is the Carrier Strike Group with 18 months of muscle memory for the exact threat they're being sent to counter. The transit challenge, 8,000 nautical miles, 3 weeks. Here's what that means operationally. The Lincoln departs the South China Sea on January 17th. The Carrier Strike Group includes 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers: USS Spruance, DDG-111, USS Stockdale, DDG-106, USS O'Kane, DDG-77. Together, these ships carry 288 vertical launch cells loaded with SM-3 ballistic missile interceptors, SM-6 dual-role missiles, and Tomahawk cruise missiles. One Ticonderoga-class cruiser, USS Mobile Bay, CG-53, adds another 122 VLS cells. The strike group represents over 400 missile tubes that can engage air, surface, and land targets simultaneously. The route requires threading through some of the most strategically sensitive waterways on Earth. First, the Strait of Malacca. This 500-mile-long waterway between Malaysia and Indonesia is one of the world's critical choke points. It's also one of the most monitored. Chinese intelligence collection vessels operate here constantly. Commercial traffic is bumper to bumper, cargo ships, tankers, container vessels. The Lincoln transits at 28 knots, fast enough to maintain schedule. Not so fast it damages the reactors or wears down the crew. Iranian intelligence knows the carrier is coming. They're tracking every mile. Satellite imagery, signals intelligence, human sources in ports along the route. Tehran is calculating arrival time and preparing accordingly. This isn't a surprise deployment. This is visible deterrence. The Pentagon wants Iran to know overwhelming capability is coming. The goal is to make Iranian commanders look at the timeline and decide that closing Hormuz before Lincoln arrives isn't worth the cost because the retaliation will be immediate and devastating once the carrier is in position. The strike group crosses the Andaman Sea, enters the Indian Ocean, maintains 25 to 28 knots continuously. Nuclear reactors provide unlimited range. The limiting factor isn't fuel, it's the escorting destroyers and cruisers. They're conventionally powered. They need refueling every 3,500 miles. Fleet oilers conduct underway replenishment every 4 days. The carrier maintains speed while destroyers pull alongside. Fuel lines connect. Thousands of gallons transfer while both ships steam at 15 knots side by side. Precision ship handling in open ocean. January 28th. The strike group approaches the Arabian Sea. They're 1,200 miles from the Strait of Hormuz. At this point, the Lincoln's air wing becomes relevant even before the carrier enters the Persian Gulf. A-18E. F Super Hornets have combat radius of 500 miles. With aerial refueling from the carrier's organic tankers, strike packages can reach Iranian coastal targets from 800 miles away. This is where deterrence shifts from future threat to present capability. Iranian radar sites along the coast start tracking the carrier. The Lincoln's E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft are already flying. The AN/APY-9 radar can detect threats at 300 miles and track over 1,000 contacts simultaneously. The Hawkeye sees everything: every Iranian fighter that launches, every patrol boat that sortie, every radar that activates. The Lincoln knows what Iran is doing before Iranian commanders finish giving orders. February 6th, the Lincoln arrives. 21 days from departure to operational station in the Gulf of Oman. 8,000 nautical miles covered. The carrier immediately begins flight operations. This is the capability the Pentagon needed in position. Now comes the question of what exactly this ship can do that justifies the sprint. The F-35C advantage. The Pentagon didn't rush the Lincoln 8,000 miles just because the ship can operate for 295 days straight. They rushed Lincoln because of 10 aircraft sitting on the flight deck. Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 314, VMFA 314. The Black Knights, 10 F-35C Lightning, 2 stealth fighters. This is the capability that justifies the sprint. In 2026, stealth isn't a magic invisibility cloak. Iran knows this. That's why they integrated the Resonance NE radar system into their air defense network years ago. This is a VHF over-the-horizon radar operating on very high-frequency wavelengths. Standard targeting radars operate on X-band with short wavelengths. Stealth aircraft are shaped to deflect those waves, the angular surfaces, the radar-absorbent coatings, all designed to scatter X-band energy away from the receiver. But the Resonance NE operates on metric wavelengths. Physics dictates that when a radio wave matches the physical dimensions of an aircraft's tail or wing, it creates resonance, reflection, detection. The Resonance NE can detect the presence of an F-35C from hundreds of miles away. It provides azimuth and approximate range. On paper, this compromises the stealth advantage, except detection is not the same as targeting. This is the critical distinction. The Resonance NE can tell Tehran that something is there. It provides general location, but it lacks the precision resolution to guide a missile. To shoot down an aircraft, you need continuous tracking with accuracy measured in meters, not miles. You need a high-frequency engagement radar that can provide the fire control data necessary to hit a maneuvering target. That's where the kill chain breaks. Iran must hand off the target from the Resonance NE to S-300 PMU-2 surface-to-air missile batteries for final engagement. Those S-300 systems operate on X-band fire control radars, and that's the exact moment the U.S. Navy's electronic warfare capability activates. Enter Electronic Attack Squadron 133, VAQ-133, the Wizards. They fly the EA-18G Growler. This aircraft is a heavily modified F/A-18F Super Hornet stripped of some weapons capacity and loaded with electronic warfare systems. For the Lincoln deployment to counter Iran, the Wizards are fielding the ALQ-249 next-generation jammer mid-band. This isn't 1990s barrage jamming that floods an entire frequency spectrum with noise. This is digital directed energy attack. The ALQ-249 can isolate the specific frequencies of the Resonance NE and S-300 fire control radars. It analyzes their waveforms. Then it transmits precisely tailored interference, false targets, digital noise, deceptive signals that look like real contacts but aren't. Here's the operational sequence. Iranian Resonance NE radar detects a disturbance in the air. Low-resolution contact. The operators attempt to cue the S-300 battery to prosecute the target. The EA-18G Growlers are already airborne. They jam the data link between the Resonance NE and the S-300 system. The communication fails. Simultaneously, they blind the S-300's fire control radar with directed jamming. The Iranian operators can see that something triggered their long-range detection system, but they have no firing solution. No track, no ability to launch missiles with any expectation of hitting the target. Meanwhile, the F-35Cs remain passive. They don't emit radar, they don't broadcast. They use their AN, APG-81 AESA radar in low probability of intercept mode. Narrow beams, frequency hopping. The sensors collect data on Iranian radar emissions. Every time the Resonance NE transmits, the F-35C's mission systems triangulate its location based on signal direction and strength. The hunters become the prey. The F-35C pilots designate the coordinates of the Resonance NE radar site. They can engage with standoff weapons, AGM-154C Joint Standoff Weapon with 70-mile range, or they can data link the target coordinates to Arleigh Burke destroyers positioned in the Gulf of Oman. Those destroyers launch Tomahawk cruise missiles. The Resonance NE site gets destroyed not by magic stealth, but by superior kill chain integration. Once the long-range radar network degrades, the F/A-18E-F Super Hornets provide the strike mass. 3 squadrons embarked on Lincoln: VFA-14 Toughatters, VFA-41 Black Aces, VFA-151 Vigilantes, 36 Super Hornets carrying over 600,000 pounds of ordnance. They strike the static infrastructure, command centers, missile storage facilities, naval bases, all now blind because the radar network has been systematically dismantled. This is the concept of networked lethality. It's not about one invisible plane. It's about the entire carrier air wing working as an integrated system to dismantle the enemy's ability to complete their own kill chain. That's why the Pentagon rushed Lincoln. Not for 10 stealth fighters alone, for 10 stealth fighters working with electronic attack aircraft, Super Hornets, E-2D Hawkeyes, and Aegis destroyers to create a capability package Iran cannot effectively contest. The defensive shield. But 75 aircraft mean nothing if Iranian missiles sink the carrier before the air wing launches. That's where the strike group's defensive network becomes critical. The 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers and 1 Ticonderoga cruiser create a defensive bubble that makes Iranian anti-ship missiles tactically irrelevant. These 4 ships carry 410 vertical launch cells combined. Each cell contains a missile selected based on mission requirements. For Middle East deployment facing Iranian ballistic and cruise missile threats, the loadout emphasizes 3 capabilities. First, Tomahawk cruise missiles, BGM-109, range exceeding 1,000 miles. Launched from the Gulf of Oman, these weapons can hit command centers in Tehran. Precision guidance using GPS and terrain-following radar. Minimal collateral damage. High accuracy. The strike group carries dozens of Tomahawks, providing immediate strike capability against high-value targets. Second, SM-3 ballistic missile interceptors. Designed to shoot down Iranian ballistic missiles in the mid-course phase of flight. When Iran launches a Shahab-3 medium-range ballistic missile aimed at shipping in the Strait, the SM-3 accelerates to Mach 4 and climbs to 100,000 feet. The kinetic warhead separates. It doesn't carry explosives. The impact velocity alone is sufficient, hitting a bullet with a bullet in space. The Lincoln strike group carries over 40 SM-3 interceptors. Third, SM-6 dual-role missiles. These weapons can engage aircraft at long range, destroy cruise missiles, and even target Iranian fast attack boats. The SM-6 has a range exceeding 200 miles for air defense and can receive targeting data from any sensor in the network. If an E-2D Hawkeye detects an Iranian fighter launching 180 miles away, an SM-6 can engage that target before the Iranian aircraft gets within weapons range of the carrier. The Aegis combat system ties everything together. All 4 escorts share radar data in real time through Cooperative Engagement Capability, CEC. One ship's radar can guide another ship's missile. This creates overlapping coverage, no gaps, no blind spots. When Iranian commanders wargame attacks on American carriers, they face this problem. To overwhelm the defenses, they need to launch hundreds of missiles simultaneously. Mass saturation. Here's what happens in that scenario. Iranian coastal batteries launch 50 anti-ship cruise missiles all at once. Coordinated timing. Multiple axes of attack, designed to saturate the defensive system through sheer numbers. 3 seconds after launch, the Aegis system classifies every threat. Computers calculate trajectories, assign priorities based on speed, altitude, and impact probability. Determine which ships engage which targets to maximize efficiency. The destroyers start firing. SM-6 missiles climb and accelerate. At 40 miles from the strike group, the first wave of Iranian missiles dies. Kinetic impacts, explosions. 40 contacts disappear from the scopes. 10 Iranian missiles remain. They're still closing. The SM-2 missiles launch. Medium-range interceptors. At 15 miles, 5 more Iranian missiles get destroyed. 5 missiles still flying. Maybe the final layer activates. Close-in weapon system. CIWS. Phalanx. 6-barrel 20mm Gatling gun that fires 4,500 rounds per minute. Radar-guided. Autonomous. The last 3 Iranian missiles enter range. The phalanx guns engage. Streams of tungsten penetrators. 2 missiles disintegrate. 1 penetrates the defensive envelope and detonates 200 yards from USS Spruance. The destroyer's hull armor absorbs the blast. Damage control teams respond. No casualties. The ship remains operational. That's the defensive calculus. Iran launched 50 missiles. 49 were intercepted or missed. 1 detonated close enough to cause minor damage, and the cost for launching that salvo is catastrophic. Every radar that activated during the attack got marked for destruction. Every launch site got targeted. Every command bunker that gave the order got designated for Tomahawk strikes. Within 6 hours, the entire Iranian coastal missile network ceases to exist. For 50 missiles, maybe one gets through. For those 50 missiles, Iran loses its primary deterrent capability. That's not a favorable exchange. Iranian commanders understand this math, and every day they choose to keep their missiles in their launchers instead of testing whether the Lincoln's defenses actually work as advertised. The strategic message. So why rush the Lincoln 8,000 miles in 3 weeks? Why not wait for the USS Theodore Roosevelt to complete workups and deploy from the East Coast? Why not pull the USS Gerald R. Ford from Venezuela? Why this ship on this timeline? The answer is deterrence by demonstration. The Pentagon needed Iran to see American capability arriving before the regime collapsed completely, not after. Before. The sprint sends a message that's impossible to misinterpret. The United States can move overwhelming combat power across 8,000 miles in 3 weeks and arrive ready for immediate operations. No workup period, no adjustment phase. The Lincoln conducts its first combat air patrol over the Gulf of Oman within hours of arriving on station. That's the capability advantage. That's what 35 years of operational experience and a $3 billion rebuild provides. A ship that can sprint across 2 oceans and immediately begin high-intensity operations against a peer-level air defense network. But there's a deeper strategic calculation. The Lincoln's presence changes Iranian decision-making while the regime still maintains cohesion. Before January 16th, when no American carriers operated in the region, Iranian commanders could look at the strategic situation and see a window. Maybe 3 weeks? Maybe 4. Time to act before American power projection arrived. The sprint closes that window. By February 6th, overwhelming capability sits 100 miles off the Iranian coast. Any decision to close the Strait of Hormuz now brings immediate consequences. Not theoretical future retaliation, immediate strikes within hours. The F-35Cs can penetrate air defenses. The Super Hornets can destroy mobile launchers. The Tomahawks can hit command centers in Tehran before Iranian forces can coordinate a sustained campaign. This is deterrence through visible presence. Iran's leaders might be desperate. They might be willing to accept costs that rational actors would avoid. But even desperate leaders do basic math. If closing Hormuz for 1 week costs them their entire coastal defense network, their air defense system, and their ability to project power beyond their own borders, the calculation changes. The benefit of disrupting oil supplies for 7 days doesn't justify losing military capability permanently. The Lincoln's motto is stamped on every bulkhead throughout the ship: shall not perish. For 35 years, that hasn't been a slogan. It's been a promise. A promise that American sea power will be there when needed. A promise that freedom of navigation will be maintained. A promise that 20% of global oil supply will continue flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. In January and February 2026, that promise required rushing one specific carrier 8,000 miles across 2 oceans in 3 weeks. Not because it was convenient, not because the timing was optimal, because the crisis demanded it. Because 21 million barrels of oil per day depend on it. Because economic stability across Asia and Europe depend on it. Because Iranian commanders needed to see with their own eyes that American deterrence isn't a bluff. The next time you fill your car with gasoline, remember what makes that possible. It's not diplomacy, it's not negotiations, it's not international agreements. It's 97,000 tons of American naval power sitting in the Gulf of Oman with 75 aircraft and 410 vertical launch cells ready to ensure that the oil keeps flowing and the strait stays open. That's why they rushed Lincoln. That's why this ship. That's why 3 weeks matters when global economic stability hangs by a thread 21 miles wide. The sprint wasn't just about moving a carrier. It was about demonstrating that American power projection can respond faster than adversaries can act. That's deterrence. That's sea control. That's the reason the line holds. If this analysis showed you why carrier selection and deployment timing matter in crisis response, you belong here on Navy Decoded. Hit subscribe for the next breakdown of how naval strategy works under pressure.